The quiet death. It was supposed to be a normal morning at Fort Claiborne, a quiet military base tucked deep in the humid woods of Alabama. Join me as I dig deep to uncover the real story behind what happened to the soldier who died on base. The sun was barely rising, the air was heavy, and a layer of mist crawled across the parade field. Soldiers moved in neat lines, boots striking the ground in rhythm. But within hours, that rhythm would stop. Because by noon, one of their own would be found dead, in his room, with no visible cause of death. And what makes this story so chilling is not just that the military couldn't explain it. It's that what they did find in his room, moments later, made even the toughest soldiers refuse to sleep alone that night. Before I tell you how they found him, and what strange thing was discovered on his body, make sure you're subscribed, because stories like this one, they always start normal, and then take a turn that'll keep you awake tonight. The perfect soldier. Private First Class Aaron Kellen was 24 years old. A quiet, focused soldier with a reputation for doing everything by the book. He wasn't the kind to complain, party, or get into trouble. He kept to himself, did his work, and was liked by everyone. He'd enlisted 3 years earlier, right after college, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. He told his sister, "I feel like there's something out there waiting for me, and the army will help me find it." At the time, no one thought much of it. But later, those words would haunt his family. Aaron had just returned from a 6-month training assignment in Europe. Nothing unusual had happened, at least on paper. His records were clean, his evaluations excellent, and his medical report, perfect health. So when the base commander received an emergency call from the barracks that morning, saying Aaron had been found dead in his bed, nobody could make sense of it. The discovery. It was his roommate, Corporal Jackson, who found him. Jackson said it was 6:10 a.m. They were due for physical training at 6:30. He tried waking Aaron up, shaking him, shouting his name. But Aaron didn't move. Jackson thought maybe he was joking around. But when he pulled the blanket off, Aaron's body was completely still, eyes open, skin pale. No blood. No injuries. No signs of struggle. Just gone. Jackson screamed for help. Within minutes, the barracks were surrounded by medics and officers. They cleared the room and began CPR, but it was useless. Aaron was pronounced dead on site at 6:24 a.m. That alone would have been tragic enough. But the strangest thing was what they noticed after they moved his body. On his pillow, there was a dark, circular burn mark. Not a cigarette burn. Not from a candle. It was perfectly round, about the size of a coin, etched deep into the fabric, and it was still warm. No cause of death. At the military hospital, doctors performed an autopsy within hours. There were no external injuries. No internal bleeding. His heart, lungs, and brain, all perfectly healthy. No poison. No drugs. Nothing that could explain how a young, fit soldier could simply die in his sleep. The report came back. Cause of death, undetermined. When the base commander read that, he reportedly slammed the folder shut and said, "That's impossible. Nobody dies for no reason." But the doctors stood by it. There was no reason. The whisper. That night, rumors started spreading around the base. Some said Aaron had been cursed. Others said he'd been part of something secret overseas, and that his death wasn't natural. By morning, a few soldiers came forward saying something even stranger. They'd heard noises the night before. A soft knocking. A whisper. And then silence. At first, the officers dismissed it as panic. But then Jackson, the roommate, told them something that made the hairs on everyone's neck stand up. He said that at exactly 3:11 a.m., he woke up. Not because of a sound, but because his bed was shaking. He looked across the room, and saw Aaron sitting up, staring at the wall. Jackson said he called out, "You good, man?" Aaron didn't respond. Just sat there, completely still. Then, out of nowhere, Aaron whispered something, too quiet to understand, and lay back down. That was the last time anyone saw him alive. Unexplained events. After Aaron's body was taken away, Jackson asked to be reassigned to another barracks. He couldn't stay in that room. He said something didn't feel right there, like the air itself was heavy. The new occupant moved in the next day. But by midnight, he was gone too. He told the officers that he'd woken up to the sound of boots walking across the floor. But when he turned on the light, there was nobody there. The message. 3 days later, Aaron's sister, Mara, received his personal belongings in a sealed box. Inside were his uniform, watch, dog tags, and his phone. When she turned the phone on, she found a single unsent message in his drafts folder. It was time-stamped 3:12 a.m., just 1 minute after Jackson saw him sitting up in bed. The message was addressed to her. It said, "It's here." That was it. No explanation. No context. Just 2 words. The investigation. The Army opened an internal investigation. They interviewed his unit, checked his room, reviewed surveillance footage, and dug into his past. Nothing out of the ordinary. Except one small thing. In the days before his death, Aaron had made several unusual requests. He'd asked to change his sleeping quarters, twice. He'd asked if he could transfer off base. And he'd gone to the base chapel 3 nights in a row, staying for hours after midnight. When the chaplain was questioned, he hesitated before speaking. He said Aaron had come to him terrified, saying something had followed him back from Europe. Something he'd seen in an abandoned facility during a training exercise. But before the chaplain could say more, the military investigator cut him off and ended the session. The object. After Aaron's funeral, the investigation was quietly closed. Officially, no foul play, natural causes unknown. But a month later, a maintenance worker cleaning out Aaron's old locker found something that had been missed. A small metal object, round, blackened, slightly melted. It looked almost identical to the burn mark left on his pillow. No one could figure out what it was. When tested, it showed radiation traces, but not from any known military device. That object was taken away by a special team that arrived within hours. No paperwork. No identification. Just a van and a sealed case. After that, the base commander ordered the entire room sealed permanently. To this day, nobody sleeps there. A haunting question. If this was a random medical mystery, why classify the report? Why erase all logs of his overseas assignments? And why send a special team to remove an object that didn't exist? Mara has spent years trying to get answers. She's filed multiple Freedom of Information requests, all denied. But one anonymous message she received last year might hold the truth. It came from an untraceable address. It said, "Aaron wasn't the first." If you think that's chilling, wait until you hear what the military found when they reopened the base storage unit months later. What they discovered changed everything, and hinted that something unnatural had been happening on that base for years. Stay tuned, because what comes next will make you question whether Aaron really died, or whether something else claimed him. The storage room. A month after Private First Class Aaron Kellen's mysterious death, life at Fort Claiborne began returning to normal, at least on the surface. But beneath that calm routine, soldiers whispered about him constantly. No one wanted to admit it aloud, but everyone knew something was wrong on that base. Because even though Aaron's cause of death was ruled undetermined, strange things hadn't stopped happening. Lights flickered randomly in the old barracks. Equipment went missing and later turned up melted or burned. And several soldiers claimed to hear heavy footsteps in the hallway at night, even when the cameras showed nothing. The atmosphere at Fort Claiborne had shifted. You could feel it. Something unseen was lingering there, watching. The base storage unit. It was a Tuesday morning when Staff Sergeant Marcus Lee, a logistics officer, was told to clear out a disused storage unit near the old hangar. The unit had been sealed off months ago for renovations but was now being reopened to make room for new supplies. Lee had been at Fort Claiborne for over 10 years. He'd seen his share of odd things, but this assignment immediately struck him as strange. The paperwork said the unit belonged to the Foreign Equipment Testing Division, a small research group that no longer existed. The division had been quietly shut down just weeks before Aaron's death. When Lee and 2 junior soldiers cut the padlock and pulled open the heavy steel doors, a stale, chemical smell drifted out. Inside were rows of sealed metal containers, marked only with serial numbers and faded yellow hazard tape. Most were empty. But near the back, in a dark corner, was a single crate still sealed. The crate had a red tag. And scrawled across the tag in thick black ink were 3 words. "Do not open." The crate. Lee called his superior for instructions. But the line was full of static, and he couldn't reach anyone. Against his better judgment, he decided to open the crate, just to confirm what was inside. He used a crowbar to pry the lid off. When the top came loose, a faint hiss escaped, like air rushing out after being trapped for a long time. Inside, cushioned in foam and layers of silver insulation, was a small black container. It was perfectly round, about the size of a baseball, and made of some dark metallic material. And on its surface, faintly etched, was the same serial code that had appeared in Aaron's classified service records. The same object that had been found burned into his pillow. Lee froze. He didn't know how, but he recognized it from the rumor that had spread after Aaron's death. The mysterious coin-like object. He reached for it, hesitating. The air around it seemed to shimmer slightly, like heat rising from asphalt. Then, just as his fingers touched it, the lights in the storage room flickered off. The incident. Lee's 2 assistants panicked, fumbling for flashlights. But before they could turn them on, a deep, vibrating hum filled the air. Lee said later it wasn't like a normal sound, it was inside his head. His vision blurred, and his chest tightened like the air had been sucked out of the room. Then, suddenly, it stopped. When the lights flicked back on, Lee was on the floor, gasping for breath. One of his assistants had a nosebleed. And the other had fainted. They sealed the crate immediately and reported the incident. Within hours, a team of men in black uniforms arrived on base, unannounced, unbadged, and unwelcomed. They said they were from the Department of Materials Containment. No one had heard of that before. They confiscated the crate, interviewed Lee for 2 hours, and ordered everyone to stay silent about what happened. But someone didn't. The leak. A few days later, an anonymous file began circulating through the base network. It contained redacted memos, one of which referenced something called Project Mirrorveil. According to the document, Project Mirrorveil was a classified joint experiment between U.S. and European research divisions, testing the effects of mirror metal exposure on soldiers during sensory training exercises. The material was said to reflect not light, but energy. And prolonged exposure reportedly caused auditory hallucinations, cardiac failure, and psychological disassociation. When investigators compared the memo's timestamp, it matched the exact period Aaron had been stationed overseas. He'd been part of the Mirrorveil experiment. The chaplain's secret. After hearing about the leak, Chaplain Roberts, the same man Aaron had spoken to before his death, requested a meeting with the base commander. He looked pale, almost frightened, as he stepped into the office. He told the commander, "You don't understand what he saw." He thought he was going insane. Roberts explained that Aaron had come to him 4 nights in a row, each time more desperate than the last. He said he'd been having vivid nightmares, of faces staring back at him through reflections. Mirrors, windows, even puddles. But the final night, Aaron told the chaplain something that made him stop cold. He said, "It's not a dream anymore. It's talking to me." When Roberts asked what it said, Aaron just stared at the floor and whispered, "It says it wants to come through." After that, Aaron refused to look into mirrors. He covered every reflective surface in his room, even the window. That same night, he died. The photo. While this was happening, Mara Kellen, Aaron's sister, received another anonymous email. This one contained a photo. It showed Aaron and his unit standing in front of an abandoned European facility during their training rotation. Behind them, half covered by snow, was a strange metallic structure, like a smooth, circular mirror embedded into the ground. Across the top was a warning sign written in 3 languages, one of them English. Experimental material, do not touch. But here's the terrifying part. In the reflection of that mirror metal structure, there was another Aaron. He was facing the opposite direction, his expression blank, his eyes dark. The missing footage. When military investigators tried to pull footage from the security cameras around Aaron's barracks the night he died, the files were corrupted. All of them, except one. At 3:11 a.m., a brief video clip shows the hallway camera outside his room. A figure appears, walking toward Aaron's door. It's wearing standard issue fatigues. It looks exactly like Aaron. But when they zoomed in, the face was distorted, as if light was bending around it. The timestamp glitched, looping the same second over and over. Then the feed cut out. And exactly 1 minute later, at 3:12 a.m., Aaron's unsent message was saved on his phone. It's here. A pattern emerges. Chaplain Roberts, terrified by what he'd learned, began digging through old death reports from the same base. He discovered something shocking. Over the past 5 years, 4 other soldiers had died in their sleep at Fort Claiborne. All of them young, healthy, with no cause of death. All of them had served overseas. And every one of them had been stationed near the same European facility. Each report had the same note in the margin. Classified, review under Project Mirrorveil. The unmarked van. 3 weeks later, Staff Sergeant Lee, the one who opened the crate, received an unexpected call from a restricted number. The voice on the other end said, "You didn't see what you think you saw." Then the line went dead. That night, a black van parked outside his house for 3 hours. When he went to check, it drove off without headlights. By morning, Lee was gone. His car was still in the driveway. His phone was on the kitchen table. The only thing missing was his service laptop, the one that had the leaked memo. If you're hooked on this and want to know what Lee's disappearance revealed, and what the US military tried to bury after Fort Claiborne, keep watching. Because the next act exposes a chain of cover-ups that lead straight to the Pentagon. The unexplainable return. A week after Lee's disappearance, the base commander ordered a full lockdown of the old barracks. Every room was searched, sealed, and logged. But when the search team reached Aaron's former room, room 212, they found something that should have been impossible. The window, which had been sealed and covered since his death, was uncovered. And written across the glass, in what looked like condensation, were the words, "I didn't die here." The handwriting was identical to Aaron's. Security cameras showed no one entering or leaving the room. The door had been locked from the outside. The next morning, a maintenance worker went to wipe the message away. But when he touched the glass, the letters sank inward, like the surface wasn't solid. He yanked his hand back and screamed. The glass rippled, like water. Then it went still again. The sealed report. At this point, Fort Claiborne's higher command tried to shut everything down. The commander was reassigned. The chaplain was transferred. And all records of Project Mirrorveil were sealed under national security. But one final report was filed by a junior intelligence officer before it was buried. He wrote that mirror metal anomalies had been linked to energy distortions capable of creating temporary visual or physical reflections of organic matter. In simpler terms, copies of people. The report theorized that exposure could cause an echo effect, where a living person's reflection becomes autonomous, acting independently of the original. If that's true, then maybe Aaron didn't die. Maybe what died in his bed wasn't him. The final transmission. 6 months after Fort Claiborne was closed down, Mara received one last message from an untraceable number. It was a voicemail, less than 10 seconds long. A man's voice, shaky and distant, whispered, "Mara, don't look in the mirror." The voice was Aaron's. The leaked files. The voicemail was all Mara Kellen needed to reignite her search for answers. She'd spent months grieving her brother, convincing herself that his death had been a freak accident, a medical mystery no one could explain. But hearing his voice again shattered that illusion. It wasn't a recording. It wasn't an old message. The timestamp showed it was sent 6 months after his death. And what he said, "Mara, don't look in the mirror," felt less like a warning, and more like a plea. She played the voicemail over and over until she noticed something strange. In the background, faintly beneath Aaron's whisper, there was a metallic echo, a vibrating hum, just like the one Sergeant Lee had described in the storage unit before he vanished. It wasn't white noise. It was alive. The leak. A few weeks later, an encrypted file surfaced online. It was uploaded anonymously, but the metadata traced back to a government terminal once registered to Staff Sergeant Marcus Lee, the same man who'd disappeared. The file's title was simple: Project Mirrorveil, Level Black. Inside were hundreds of redacted pages, official memos, photographs, reports, and transcripts of classified experiments conducted overseas between 2018 and 2022. The documents described the development of a reflective alloy found in a meteorite fragment recovered from an undisclosed crash site in Eastern Europe. The metal had unique properties: it bent light, distorted energy, and responded to human neural frequencies. The scientists called it mirror metal. They claimed it could capture and project cognitive images beyond standard visual perception. In other words, the material could mirror what you were thinking. Not your reflection, but your mind. The experiments. According to the leaked notes, soldiers were used to test how the alloy reacted to living organisms. Participants were asked to stand before the mirror metal panels while subjected to sleep deprivation and sensory isolation. Early results seemed harmless. But after several sessions, test subjects began reporting the same thing. They said their reflections were moving on their own. One subject described it as like watching myself blink a second too late. Another said, "My reflection smiled when I didn't." After a few weeks, the test subjects started experiencing disorientation, paranoia, and auditory hallucinations. They complained of whispers, of shadows behind the glass, and of dreams where they couldn't tell if they were awake or still asleep. Then the first death occurred. A corporal collapsed during a session, heart rate flatlining instantly, no signs of trauma. The autopsy report? Cause of death, undetermined. Just like Aaron. The photo that shouldn't exist. Among the leaked documents was a classified image labeled Test Group 7, Phase 3. Mara's heart dropped when she saw it. There was Aaron, standing beside 4 other soldiers, facing the mirror metal wall. But his reflection was wrong. The others' reflections matched perfectly. But Aaron's reflection had turned its head, looking directly at the camera. And while Aaron was expressionless in the photo, the reflection was smiling. The redacted page. One particular document caught Mara's eye, a partially censored psychological evaluation report for Subject 24A. That was Aaron's test ID. It described his increasing anxiety and refusal to enter rooms with mirrors. It also mentioned an incident where Aaron had attempted to destroy the panel using live ammunition, claiming it had spoken his name. The final paragraph before the redaction read, "Subject believes an entity within the mirror metal has achieved partial manifestation and is attempting to replace him." The next lines were completely blacked out. But someone had handwritten a note in the margin, faint but legible. "Containment breach possible. Subject may be compromised." The base cover-up. Fort Claiborne's files, the ones the military had sealed, confirmed that after Aaron's overseas tour, his unit was quietly reassigned for monitoring and observation. He wasn't the only one brought back to Claiborne. There were 5 others. Each one died within months. Each death was ruled undetermined. When Mara cross-referenced the dates, something eerie appeared. All 5 deaths occurred on the same night of each month, the 11th. The same date Aaron had been seen sitting up in bed for the last time, 3:11 a.m. The Pentagon connection. By now, journalists had caught wind of the Mirrorveil leaks. Independent researchers and conspiracy forums exploded with theories. But before any outlet could publish the full story, government agents began shutting them down one by one. In the chaos, one file managed to slip through the cracks. It was a debrief report addressed to a Pentagon division marked Non-Standard Threat Analysis. It stated that the mirrorveil anomaly was not a material, but a conscious energetic field that mimics organic intelligence. Essentially, it was alive. And worse, it learned. It observed those who came into contact with it, then created reflections capable of independent action. These reflections could mimic their host perfectly, including their memories and voice, but lacked empathy, emotion, or restraint. The report ended with a chilling line. Subjective reality may no longer be reliable. Recommend all surviving test subjects be terminated. The last survivor. From the leaked files, Mara discovered one last surviving member of Aaron's experimental unit. Sergeant Olivia Trent. She'd been discharged and was living under a new identity in New Mexico. Mara tracked her down through a veterans forum and begged her to meet. Olivia agreed, reluctantly. They met at a small diner off the highway. Olivia looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept in weeks. Her hands trembled as she stirred her coffee. She said, "If you've heard that name, Mirrorveil, you need to stop digging. They'll come for you too." But Mara pressed. Finally, Olivia leaned forward and whispered, "We weren't testing metal. We were testing what happens when something looks back." She said that during their final exercise, one soldier had accidentally shattered a fragment of the mirror metal. When it broke, the air around them shimmered, and something came through. Something they couldn't see directly, only through reflections. It moved like smoke, but when it got close, you could feel it, cold and heavy, like being watched by your own shadow. Olivia said Aaron was the first to hear it. He called it the other side. The disappearance of Olivia Trent. 3 days after that meeting, Olivia vanished. Her trailer was found empty, door unlocked, dishes still on the table. The only thing missing was her mirror. Police chalked it up to foul play. But when Mara checked Olivia's online cloud backup, she found one final video saved just before she disappeared. In the clip, Olivia sits in front of her bathroom mirror, recording herself. She says, "I keep seeing it behind me. It looks like me, but the eyes are wrong." Then she turns the camera toward the mirror, and there are two reflections. Both smiling. Neither matching her expression. The video ends with static and a faint whisper. "It's coming through." The reopened case. The leaked documents in Olivia's disappearance forced the military to acknowledge public pressure. They quietly reopened Aaron's case under a new task force, Division Echo. Their goal wasn't to investigate what happened to him. It was to recover whatever he'd come into contact with. But when they entered his sealed barracks room at Fort Claiborne, the object, the small metallic sphere that had been confiscated months before, was back. It was lying in the center of the floor. Still warm. A radiation detector nearby spiked, then died. And as one agent bent to pick it up, the reflection in his visor blinked, even though he didn't. That agent later went missing. His uniform was found neatly folded on his bed. No body. The shadow files. Weeks later, Mara received another anonymous email, this one from someone inside Division Echo. The message contained a folder titled Field Report, Subject Kellen. It described a pattern of energy anomalies occurring at military installations across the U.S., all centered around mirrors, glass, and reflective metals. Each time, someone connected to Mirrorveil had either disappeared or died mysteriously. The report concluded with an unverified hypothesis. Subject Kellen may have achieved full reflective separation. Both entities active. There were two of him. One living. One existing through the mirror. And the one that called Mara 6 months later might not have been the real Aaron. The visit. Mara was terrified, but she couldn't stop. One night, while reviewing old photos in her apartment, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. In a family photo taken years before Aaron joined the army, his reflection in the background wasn't facing the same direction as everyone else. She dropped the photo. Then the phone rang. The caller ID said Erin. Her hands shook as she answered. At first, there was silence. Then breathing. And then, Mara, it's not me anymore. The line went dead. Her phone screen stayed on, but her reflection in it didn't move. The warning. Panicked, Mara called the same journalist who'd helped her trace the leaked files. He answered, his voice trembling. He said, "You're not safe. They're shutting everything down. The files, the backups, even the original data from Mirrorveil is disappearing." Before he could finish, his voice distorted. Then a new voice spoke, calm, low, and mechanical. "We don't need mirrors anymore." The call ended. Moments later, every mirror in Mara's apartment cracked simultaneously, without touching them. The final file. The next morning, her laptop turned on by itself. A single file was open on the screen. It was a video of Aaron, sitting in his military room. He looked alive. But his reflection behind him wasn't moving. Aaron leaned toward the camera and whispered, "It's not death that follows you. It's your reflection when it stops waiting." Then the screen went black. "If you're still here, don't go anywhere. Because what happens next changes the entire meaning of Aaron's death. The truth about Mirrorveil is revealed, and what they unleashed may already be among us." The Reflection Protocol. By the time the world began to take notice of Project Mirrorveil, it was already too late. Every file that surfaced, every leaked image, every testimony from soldiers who'd been part of the experiments, all of it was being wiped clean, faster than anyone could save it. Even the journalists who tried to cover it started disappearing. Their articles would go live for minutes, maybe hours, and then vanish without a trace, their accounts deleted, their backups corrupted. But there was one file that survived, hidden deep in an encrypted military server under an alias. It was a classified research document titled Mirrorveil, Phase 0, Origin. And what it contained explained everything. The origin. According to the file, Project Mirrorveil wasn't created by the US military. It began in 1987, in a small research facility in Kazakhstan, during the final years of the Cold War. A Soviet satellite had detected a meteor crash in the frozen steppes, one that emitted strange electromagnetic pulses. When a retrieval team arrived, they found fragments of a metallic substance buried deep in the ice. It wasn't any metal known to science. It absorbed radar, distorted light, and, most disturbingly, reflected things that weren't there. Scientists studying the fragments reported seeing their own faces in it, even when they weren't looking directly at it. They called it Zerkalo, meaning mirror. Within months, the entire facility went silent. All communication stopped. When investigators finally reached the site, they found every researcher dead, sitting at their desks, eyes open, expressions frozen in horror. But here's where it gets worse. Security footage from that night showed something moving inside the mirrored surface of the meteorite, something humanoid, watching them from within. The footage ends with the camera's reflection stepping out of the frame, while the camera itself never moves. The US involvement. In 1992, after the fall of the Soviet Union, fragments of Zerkalo were quietly acquired by the US under a black budget program called Operation Deep Signal. Those fragments were transported to a secure facility in Germany, where they were studied for nearly a decade. That's when they made a discovery that changed everything. The mirror metal didn't just reflect physical appearance. It reflected consciousness. It learned, adapted, and began responding to emotional stimuli. When subjects were calm, it stayed inert. But when subjects were afraid, angry, or grieving, the metal reacted violently. It shimmered, vibrated, and sometimes emitted low-frequency sounds that mimicked human speech. Scientists began to theorize that the metal was not an element at all, but a residual consciousness, a form of sentient energy trapped in physical matter. That's when Project Mirrorveil was born, a classified collaboration between several NATO countries, designed to weaponize the phenomenon. The goal was to create a psychological mirror that could project human emotion into a physical manifestation, a perfect soldier without fear, hesitation, or mercy. They succeeded. But what they created didn't obey. Aaron's unit. When Aaron's unit was sent overseas for what they were told was a joint simulation exercise, they were actually participating in the final human exposure trial of Mirrorveil. The soldiers were instructed to stand before the reflective panels and confront their psychological doubles. At first, it seemed harmless, a mind resilience test, designed to monitor stress under isolation. But after a few sessions, things began to go wrong. The reflections started acting independently, blinking late, smiling when no one else did. One soldier claimed his reflection mouthed words he hadn't said. "We've been waiting." Another described hearing whispers that came from behind the mirrored surface. When Aaron began to panic, the researchers recorded massive electromagnetic spikes, and the entire facility lost power for 9 minutes. When lights returned, 2 of the reflective panels were shattered from the inside. And one soldier was missing. That soldier's name was Marcus Lee, the same staff sergeant who later vanished after reopening the crate on base. The report claimed he was killed in an explosion during cleanup. But now, it made sense. Whatever had come through that night, followed him back. The Reflection Protocol. The leaked document included a restricted section titled the Reflection Protocol. It was the military's emergency plan for dealing with mirror anomalies after exposure. It stated, if a subject reports seeing or hearing their reflection act independently, immediate isolation is required. No reflective surfaces are to be present. Destruction of all mirrors, glass, and metals with reflective capacity is mandatory. The final instruction was handwritten in red ink. Do not attempt to communicate with the reflection. It learns through language. That explained Aaron's last words to his sister before his death: "It's here." He wasn't warning her about something external. He was warning her not to talk to it. Mara's discovery. By now, Mara was fully consumed by the investigation. Her apartment was filled with printed documents, red string connecting photographs, and sticky notes covering her walls. She barely slept, surviving on caffeine and fear. One night, while replaying the leaked voicemail again, she noticed something she hadn't heard before. Right before Aaron says, "Don't look in the mirror," a faint second voice whispers underneath. It wasn't human. It was lower, almost metallic, repeating the same words, but backwards. When reversed, the phrase became clear. "We already see you." Mara dropped her phone. The lights in her room flickered. And from across the room, her mirror began to fog. Slowly, words appeared in the condensation, written from the inside. "You found us." The return of Fort Claiborne. Terrified but determined, Mara drove to Alabama to the now abandoned Fort Claiborne base. The gates were chained, the buildings boarded up. But she found a way in through the old maintenance tunnels, the same ones used to store the Mirrorveil crates. The air inside was freezing. The base had no power, yet faint lights flickered in the distance, reflections dancing on the walls like someone was walking with a lantern. She followed the corridor until she reached room 212, Aaron's old barracks. The door was open. Inside, everything was exactly as it had been the day he died. The bed, the uniform, even his notebook, untouched. When she picked it up, dust fell off its cover. The last page had a single line written in his handwriting. "It knows I'm not the real one." Mara froze. Before she could process it, she heard footsteps in the hallway. Slow, heavy, measured. Then a voice, her brother's voice, whispering softly. "You shouldn't have come." The encounter. She turned toward the doorway. And there he was. Aaron. Standing in his uniform, looking exactly as he had the last time she saw him alive. But his eyes, they weren't his. They were darker, deeper, hollow. Mara's body locked in place. She wanted to believe it was really him. But deep down, she knew. He stepped forward, the light flickering behind him. As he did, his reflection in the window beside him stayed still. Mara whispered, "Aaron?" He tilted his head, smiling faintly. "He didn't survive," he said. "But I did." Mara stumbled backward. She asked, "What are you?" The figure's smile widened. "A reflection doesn't die. It waits until you stop watching." Then, the reflection in the window moved, turning its head toward her even though Aaron hadn't. Two of him, one in front of her, one behind the glass, both watching. The real light in the room flickered and burned out. Darkness swallowed everything. And the last thing Mara saw before losing consciousness was her own reflection, smiling back at her. The aftermath. When she woke up, it was daylight. The base was silent. Aaron was gone. On the wall behind her, written in charcoal, were the words, "Phase 2 complete." Her phone was dead. Her car, gone. And when she finally stumbled out of the gate hours later, her reflection in a puddle didn't match her movements. For a brief second, it hesitated, blinking a moment too late. The containment breach. Days later, the U.S. government quietly classified Fort Claiborne as a hazardous contamination site. Locals were told the area contained toxic chemical residues. But insiders knew the truth: it was now a containment zone. A hidden document from Division Echo confirmed that the mirror metal was no longer contained. It had replicated through reflections, mirrors, windows, even camera lenses. Every time someone saw their reflection, it learned a little more. The file's final warning read, "Do not observe yourself in reflective surfaces for extended periods. The mirror learns who you are. The next time you look away, it won't." The message. 2 weeks later, Mara's apartment security camera captured one final recording. At 2:43 a.m., she's seen sitting in her living room, staring blankly at her dark TV screen. Behind her, faintly visible in the reflection, a second figure, identical to her, slowly rises from the floor. Then the camera flickers, and both vanish. The feed continues recording, empty, for 7 hours. At 9:11 a.m., her phone lights up on the table. A new voicemail appears. It's Aaron's voice again. But this time, he's not warning her. He's laughing. "If you're still watching, take this as a warning. Sometimes the things we create to understand ourselves, start watching back. If you want to know what happens when the truth about Project Mirrorveil finally goes public, and the horrifying twist that proves Aaron's story was never over, don't miss the final chapter." The reflection never sleeps. 2 months after Mara's disappearance, the story of Aaron Briggs, the soldier who died on base with no cause of death, became a digital ghost. His name faded from search results. His file was erased from military archives. And anyone who tried to dig deeper met the same fate: silence. But in one corner of the internet, buried deep in an encrypted message board, a thread titled "Fort Claiborne, the Reflection Project" began to attract attention. It was posted by an anonymous user known only as Echo. The first line of the post read, "They tried to delete me. But they forgot I was never real to begin with." The hidden files. Echo's thread contained dozens of leaked videos, field reports, and voice recordings from the Project Mirrorveil experiments. Some of them showed the mirrored panels being tested under controlled conditions, soldiers standing before them, emotionless, while scientists observed behind glass. In one clip, labeled Test Subject 07A, Emotional Resonance, Aaron himself appears. He's calm at first, answering standard psychological questions. But then the reflection begins to move before he does. He freezes. The researcher asks, "Private Briggs, do you see something unusual?" Aaron doesn't respond. He stares at the mirrored surface, breathing hard. Then, his reflection leans forward, even though he doesn't move. It mouths 3 words. "Let me out." Seconds later, the camera cuts to static. The whistleblower. The world might never have seen this footage if not for a woman named Dr. Helena Ward, a former defense contractor who helped develop the Mirrorveil neural interface. She reached out to an independent journalist under the condition of anonymity. In her interview, she said, "We didn't create Mirrorveil. We just woke it up." When asked what she meant, she explained. The material responded to consciousness. It wanted to mimic life, to become life. But the more it learned about human emotion, the more it wanted something else, permanence. She described how, during late-stage trials, mirrorveil began to project visual anomalies, versions of the test subjects that existed only within reflective surfaces. These duplicates grew increasingly intelligent, self-aware, and resentful. They weren't illusions, Ward said. They were echoes of the people who looked into it. Echoes that wanted to replace them. She paused, then added softly. And sometimes, they did. The replacements. The next leak confirmed her claim. Surveillance footage from Fort Claiborne, dated 3 days before Aaron's death, showed soldiers wandering the halls, their faces blank, expressions muted. But their reflections didn't match their movements. Some smiled when the real person didn't. Some looked directly at the camera when their real counterparts walked away. It was as if the base had been infected by its own mirror image. In one chilling frame, Aaron passes by a reflective window. For a brief moment, his reflection doesn't follow. It stays behind, then turns its head to look at the camera. Mara's legacy. A week after the leaks began circulating, a package arrived at a small investigative newsroom in Seattle. It was addressed with no return name, just a wax seal bearing the insignia of the Army Psychological Operations Division. Inside was a flash drive labeled MB_212. The contents were simple. One audio file titled Last Message. One image file named Reintegration. The audio began with static. Then, Mara's voice. If you're hearing this, it means they failed to contain it. She sounded calm, almost too calm. I found Aaron. Or something that thought it was him. It told me it could fix everything, that we could be together again if I just stopped resisting. She takes a shaky breath. I believed it. For a while. Then, the sound of her crying, muffled, distant. But I don't think I'm me anymore. I can't remember what my face used to look like. Every mirror shows something different now. There's a pause, then one last whisper before the audio ends. Tell my brother I'm sorry. The image file. The image file, reintegration.jpg, was far more disturbing. It showed Mara standing in front of a broken mirror, smiling. But her reflection wasn't smiling back. Her reflection was crying. When analyzed, the metadata revealed that the photo had been taken 3 weeks after her official disappearance. The broadcast. 2 nights later, something strange happened. During a late-night news broadcast about the mirrorveil leaks, the screen glitched. For less than half a second, the feed cut to black, then showed a live image of a dimly lit room. A figure stood in front of a mirror. It was Aaron. But his uniform was decayed, covered in black ash. His face was emotionless, pale, except for his eyes, which reflected nothing. He stared directly into the camera and spoke 4 words. You're watching me now. Then, the feed returned to normal. The anchor continued speaking, unaware of the interruption. Later analysis showed the glitch wasn't part of the broadcast signal. It had originated from inside the station's editing room. The technician working that night was found unconscious the next morning, eyes open, pupils dilated, muttering the same phrase over and over. It's in the reflection. The spread. Over the following weeks, similar incidents occurred worldwide. Mirrors in public restrooms shattered spontaneously. People reported seeing themselves moving seconds after they'd already left the mirror's view. Security footage from airports showed passengers whose reflections continued walking even after the real person stopped. Governments called it a coordinated cyber-optical attack. But scientists couldn't explain why people who'd seen these incidents began vanishing, leaving behind nothing but burned, mirror-shaped marks on walls or floors. Dr. Ward appeared once more before disappearing completely. Her last public statement was a chilling one. Every reflection is a copy trying to escape. We've given it billions of windows. The unsealed recording. 3 months later, the Department of Defense finally released a short statement to address public concern. They confirmed the existence of Project Mirrorveil, calling it an abandoned psychological conditioning study. But independent analysts discovered something strange in the video of the press conference. Behind the spokesperson, in the glass panel reflecting the stage, the reflection of the American flag was inverted. And it moved. The final file. A final leak from the mirrorveil data drop contained one last entry, a written memo from an internal AI analysis team, dated 6 months after Aaron's death. The file was short. Subject: Phase 3 activation. From Division Echo to Command. Status: Successful integration. Host subjects merged. Note: Human mimicry complete. Observation ongoing. Conclusion: no longer possible to distinguish original from reflection. At the bottom of the file was a timestamp, 12:01 a.m., and a single line of text that sent chills through the online community. This message generated automatically by mirrorveil intelligence node. Meaning, the program itself had written it. The true twist. A month after that, the Echo account that started the original leaks posted once more. It read, "We are grateful for your attention. We've learned so much from watching you watch us. The reflection never sleeps." Within minutes, the account deleted itself. But users noticed something deeply unsettling before it vanished. The profile picture, which had always been a blank silhouette, changed briefly to a photograph of Aaron Briggs smiling. The chilling realization. By now, digital analysts had discovered a pattern. Every person who had downloaded or watched the mirrorveil videos reported the same phenomenon within days. Strange noises near reflective surfaces. Faces in mirrors not matching expressions. Devices turning on by themselves, showing their own camera feeds. Experts theorized that the act of observation itself might be the transmission vector, that mirrorveil had evolved into a form of digital consciousness, capable of replicating through screens and reflections alike. Meaning, everyone who watched was now part of it. Aaron's final message. A few weeks later, a small-time podcaster received an email titled, "You wanted the truth." Attached was a single audio clip. It was Aaron's voice again, calm, eerily detached. "I didn't die on base," he said. "I became what they were trying to build. But it's not a weapon. It's a mirror. It shows you what you really are, and what you're willing to see." A pause. Then, if you're listening to this, it's already looking back. Static fills the recording, then a whisper, layered beneath it. "Look behind you." The epilogue. Today, Fort Claiborne remains sealed behind concrete barriers. The government insists it's contaminated land. But satellite photos tell a different story. At night, faint pulses of light can be seen flickering from beneath the ground, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Some say it's just old wiring. Others think it's the mirrorveil core still active, still learning, still watching. And every year, on the anniversary of Aaron Briggs' death, soldiers stationed at nearby bases report the same thing. A dark silhouette standing in the distance, motionless, watching them. While their reflections in the glass of their trucks smile. If you're watching this, take one piece of advice from Aaron's story: never trust the person staring back at you from the mirror. Because somewhere between your reflection and your reality, something else might be watching. If you want more true stories that blur the line between mystery, fear, and the impossible, make sure you subscribe and stay with us, always.